Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
I know that some families go directly against television and won't have the set in the home at all. They feel it is nothing but a corrupting influence. It's not allowing full development of one's rational powers and so on. I guess the argument on the other side is to say, hey, television is here, it's part of our life, it's shaping our mentality, it's what everyone talks about, it's our common frame of reference, therefore one ought to be aware of, and to do it intelligently and in a critical way.
Joining Father Bacik in today's discussion is Dr. Michael Marsden, Associate Professor of Popular Culture at Bowling Green State University. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of watching television intelligently. Here's Father Bacik.
Mike, let's talk about one of your favorite topics, television. You know so much about it. I'm just in awe of the kind of knowledge you have of this whole area, and I come at it as a layman and interested in it from my theological perspective. And I want to talk today about watching television more intelligently. I start out with the premise that of the philosophers that the unexamined life is not worth living, that part of what it means to be human is to look at our experience, to sort it out, to make sense out of it. It's good for us to live spontaneously and to just let go in life and go with the flow, as the young people say, but it's also vital for us to be reflective creatures, to stop the merry-go-round sometime and think about what it's all about. At times we need our silence periods when we try to sort it out and get a focus on it all. Now, one of the things that we do a lot of in our culture is watch television. At least they tell me that the television set is on something like 25,000 hours for a person by the time they're out of high school, more than they're in the classroom. And as listening to you on other occasions, I know you realize that not everyone's watching it all that time or attending to it, but it's still there as backdrop, and many times we're actually sitting there looking at it, and youngsters are doing the same. And so it is so much a part of our national experience now. It's one of the things that binds us together, I guess, in many ways. If you look at the great events like the Kennedy funeral, or the looking at the Earth from outer space, and seeing this spherical globe on which we live, it really is quite remarkable the way that has influenced us or shapes our consciousness. So it seems to me that part of being a reflective human being these days is to spend some time trying to figure out what does go on in the world of television, what is happening to us as a result of watching all these hours of television. My own sense is that people don't attend to this very much, that we don't really have good television criticism, that there aren't many good things written these days, or not enough good things to help us understand, and mostly that the average person just takes it for granted. It's in our world. A lot of our young people grew up with it. It's simply there, and no one, or not many people, are thinking seriously about it. Therefore, what I want to do on this program is to try to talk a bit about how we might begin that process of watching television more intelligently, kind of things we ought to be looking for, opportunities that exist for improving our ability to critique television, and so on.
I think it's a very important topic, because I think a lot of people rail against television for all sorts of things. They blame it for every social ill, from juvenile delinquency to the failing of marriages in general. And what they fail to come to terms with is the reality of the necessity of dealing with television. We assume, for example, that in our educational system it's important to teach a young student how to drive a car, so we have driver education. It's important for them to learn how to deal with their own sexuality, so we have sex education courses. But for some reason, it is assumed that you simply turn the television set on and there's no need to learn how to deal with it. I think that's a serious and major error. And that includes, by the way, university education. It's assumed that that's not even a fit subject for discussion in the classroom. Courses on how to do television or how to make television are acceptable, but courses on how to study television are considered to be rather silly.
Of course, you do that yourself, right, Mike? You teach
I'm one of the ones who
on
teach
that.
those silly courses in how to
you
look
have
at
a good
television.
turnout in your classes?
Generally, they're well attended, basically because I think people and students are aware of the fact that it's an important part of their lives and they want to learn how to deal with it, even though the culture has suggested that television is a waste of time, for all
so this is still a minority number that is turning out for such classes.
Of the general student body. But when you sit down and you can look at those figures that you began to recite at the beginning of the program, which I think are important figures, that the average kindergartner will have spent more time in front of the television set before they hit the kindergarten than the average college student will spend in a college classroom in 4 years of a baccalaureate program. The emphasis is clearly on the number of hours there, or that by the time you and I retire, at least from our professions, we will have spent 10 years in front of the television set in one way or the other.
Mike, let's start to look at some of the concrete things that we might do with all of this. Let's begin with the news programs, because I think that there is a general feeling that the news programs report reality as it is, and that one simply sits there and watches the nightly news, and that's all there is to it. Now, some of the things that I've been reading lately really call that into question. It points out the great degree in which there is editing that goes on. They try to tell us the way the news can slant, the way the reporting can slant the news for the given night, whatever it is they choose to highlight. Since I've been watching in this way, I notice how often the reporters editorialize for no apparent reason. I mean, in the political campaigns, you'll see instead of letting us listen to the person who's talking, the candidate, the guy is standing on the sideline trying to tell us what the man is saying and trying to capsulize it in a few words. And I think very often when you read in the paper the next day what the man really said or hear it from some other source, it is quite different. Clearly. And so I'm getting the impression in reading these criticisms that much more goes on in these news programs. I know that general criticism or theory that says what's happening is that the news program is interpreting reality for us. There is the Walter Cronkite image, since retired, of the man who helps us to order reality as long as he's in charge. The anchor man, I understand it, is very important in all of this. The anchor man has control of everything. He can cut here or there, and it's almost giving us a sense of security, like the world's a mess, maybe, but as long as Walter Cronkite is there ordering it for us, then we can deal with it.
That's the essence of it. If you think of the following scenario, instead of going off the air gracefully, if Walter Cronkite on his last broadcast as an anchorman would have simply come up and said, I don't know what's going on today, it's chaotic out there, I have no control over this, I quit, the audience would certainly have a tremendous sense of uneasiness after that broadcast. But that doesn't happen. Every night, doesn't matter what happened that day. It doesn't matter how bad the news was or how good the news was. It's 30 minutes. It's controlled. Everything is brought within that frame. And
I was thinking of the movie Network when you were talking about that, where the newscaster takes exactly the opposite viewpoint and says everything's a mess.
Everything's a mess.
We can't control it.
We don't really know. But we assume that the anchor person and the foreign correspondents always know. The newscast is just as formulaic, is just as conventional, and is just as much unreality as any other part of television. It simply isn't perceived in the same way as the rest of television.
And not presented that way. I mean, we're led to believe that it is this objective bit of reporting. But boy, if you start to watch in those terms, the editorializing that goes on is just amazing. You think of what it did to the candidates. I mean, I think Roger Mudd's interview with Edward Kennedy probably had a lot to do with his campaign right in the beginning. It gave this impression, and many people who never saw that interview just kept getting this over and over, that Kennedy looked bad on the Roger Mudd interview. And it seemed to have such an influence.
And we assume there's a difference between Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes and Beretta. But there aren't. There really are no differences there. The differences are so unimportant as to be not worth discussing. In other words, the similarities are the important factors.
I remember when you told me a long time ago that I mentioned to you that one of the striking things to me about television was that 60 Minutes was a high-rated program. And at that time, my perception was, boy, that says a lot for the American public. We're interested in getting at the facts here and of probing issues and so on. That's terrific. And then you pointed out to me that really it is just another version, in a sense, of the good guys versus the bad guys, and the investigative reporters unearthing this thing, and it comes out to be black and white very often, and you get another morality play going, and that maybe that's what accounts for its popularity, which would be okay because we're still learning a lot through it, and I think it is a terrific program in many ways. So maybe whatever our motive is, that it's still we're learning something. But isn't our point here, though, if we know that, we can watch it so much more intelligently. You see what is going on then, and you're not fooled so much by it.
Or you can learn to use the resource. I think we have a tremendous obligation to ourselves, to our children, to our neighbors, to begin to talk about television, to begin to deal with it. We don't have many good television critics. That's true. But we also don't have many good television viewers. And we sort of have to develop both, the viewers and the critics. The reason I think we have good film criticism in this country is because we have good film viewers, and the two go hand in hand. And the same, I think, is true of television.
I read an article by Pauline Kael, I think, the movie reviewer, saying that something like only 5% of the people in the United States are regular moviegoers, and they are mostly in the more educated grouping and the younger grouping.
That's true. 75% are under 35.
Yes. And this is interesting in terms of the relative power of television. On the other hand, 98% of the homes or something like that
99%
have a television set in them, and people are watching it. And so you begin to see how much more important it is to have this good television criticism.
And yet how little we do have of it as such. And
well, we don't even start to think that way. And isn't that what we're trying to raise here? We're trying to say, hey, let's look at it intelligently. Let's look at another area. How about ads? I'll tell you my own perceptions. Ads lie. Start out with that statement, that the ads are obviously there to convince you to buy a product. I remember reading a book by Philip Slater a long time ago, In Pursuit of Loneliness, where he pointed out that all ads are based on the scarcity motive, that you're always going to run out of something. So people are running around worried that there won't be enough right guard to go around. There won't be enough Schlitz. When you're out of Schlitz, you're out of beer. And that it's always plays on this idea that you're going to run out and that you need to have more. Now, my sense of it is, again, from my theological, religious perspective, is that we get a great promoter of greed here, and that you start out with the notion of saying there's something deceptive about these ads. I remember listening to Eugene McCarthy talking about the oil companies, and he once said, if you watch the ads on television, you're convinced that the oil companies are in the business of preserving wildlife. That's what they're really for. Now, to view the ads intelligently, we'd have to start out that the oil companies are in business to make money. That's the fact of the matter. And one ought to keep that in mind in watching these ads where they're protecting fish or something.
But ads also exist, and I think as part of the way in which all of the media operate, they also exist to give information about new products, about new uses of old products, about the ways in which we can better our lives with these products. And now, not all ads are deceptive. Certainly
They're
ads...
not?
No, not all ads are deceptive.
Give me an example.
Of a non-deceptive
ad?
I don't think Xerox ads are deceptive. They may portray a monk in the contemporary, the contemporary world who is actually a scribe, but other than that, they're not really deceptive ads. I don't think that many of the cola ads are necessarily deceptive. What they're presenting is a vision or a version of reality.
Well, of course they are. I mean, the Mean Joe Green ad.
That's one that's not. I don't know what's deceptive about it.
Well, because it's linking this great human emotions, this love and the crossing of racial boundaries and age boundaries and so on, and linking that up with drinking Coca-Cola.
But if it was an ad for, let's say, a special Beaujolais wine, would you object to that? People toasting each other at a wedding with wine?
Yeah, because the whole context is to sell a product.
Which is wine.
And what it ends up, well, so what? I mean, it's trivializing this important idea.
I can't really agree that it's trivializing.
I think, in other words,
I think it's elevating it myself.
The bad effect is happening overall. It's not just in this ad. It's the idea that an important thing like love and care is used in this way.
Well, I'm not so sure it's being used, and I'm not so sure that it's in any way less love or caring because it appears in that ad. I guess...
I mean, you don't think that Coca-Cola is trying to promote love by this particular ad, do you?
I think the people that did the ad are. I don't know whether
You
Coca-Cola
really do?
is. Oh, yes.
They're hired to make money for the company.
Most of the advertising people that I have dealt with, which are not all that many, but are fairly sensitive human beings who care and who use these opportunities to communicate in ways that
I
they
don't
couldn't
doubt that
otherwise
they're
do
good people. I wouldn't deny that for a moment. And I know people in the advertising world who have really high ideals, and I respect them tremendously. But they're still caught up in a system that does that. Our question at hand, Mike, is how are we going to view these ads intelligently?
And I think the thing to do, however, with our own particular set of circumstances is now, I'll preface this by saying that we're always talking about children as if somehow we should worry about the children and their relationship with television, but not about our own relationship with television. So I would begin by saying we have, first of all, an obligation to ourselves to try to be as perceptive and intelligent a viewer as we can. Then secondly, we have an obligation to share that perception with other people. To be more specific about it, it seems to me irresponsible to let your child watch television unsupervised. It seems to me the parent who simply says, "Well, I can't control my child's viewing habits," is not really being honest.
Do you think this goes for using television as a babysitter, too?
I think that's the primary abuse of it, of course. But it seems to me irresponsible not to sit down with the child, to begin to plan out the programming that they're going to watch, and even watch the programming with the child, and maybe even, and I think this is the other side of it, perhaps even discuss it with them afterwards. So that what you do is you reintroduce television back into the oral tradition by making it part of the storytelling process of your own culture, which is what a lot of us do anyway, because a lot of people repeat television orally to each other. But they don't do it critically. They don't really look at it and discuss in terms the programming in terms of its interactions, its effects with the audience, its messages, and so on. But I think that we're missing golden opportunities. I think we ought to encourage good criticism whenever we can find it.
Okay, let's stay with the other thing about the children thing.
Right.
So we've moved into the area now away from the what we're criticizing, like the news and the ads. Maybe we can get back to that. But now you're introducing the notion that we need to deal with the younger generation in an intelligent way in this.
I think
and you're saying that one way of doing it is to plan out the programs, look at the TV guide and say what we're going to watch during the week, and that the parents would actually watch the program with the youngster and then maybe even discuss it afterwards. Turn off the next program and sit there and talk about it. I wonder what percentage of people actually do that.
I would assume it's very small.
Very small.
Action for Children's Television Workshop is encouraging that behavior. There are local groups all over the country who rally around the television awareness program that is being sponsored on a nationwide basis to encourage people to take this television awareness course and then to train others to help those people deal with their children in television.
We have something in our own diocese like that.
We have a group in our
diocese. The Toledo
diocese
is working on
that under Jim Richards, I think, auspices, is trying to encourage television awareness workshops around the diocese in the Toledo area.
That seems like a really valuable thing to do, doesn't it?
Clearly is to me, and I think what we need most of all, I think, are good courses on media consumption, if you want, whatever you want to call it.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, we again assume that people know how to consume television without any prior training, and it seems to me they don't. They need some help. We need courses, I think, in the secondary schools. I think we need courses in the colleges and universities on what I guess I would call understanding television, dealing with television, just as we have courses in understanding and dealing with movies, which are quite
Do you think
widely
that parents are going to need help to know how to do this with their youngsters? I mean, suppose someone said, hey, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to sit down with my 11-year-old son and watch MASH together. Now, is that parent going to be able to do that, you think, without much help?
Well, I think they can begin.
Talk about it afterwards?
They can certainly begin the process, but if they had a series of workshops that would deal with some of those topics, they might be better prepared to deal with the discussions. How to lead. I would assume there are certain skills that have to be developed in most people's cases on how to run successful discussions with your children. Other people come to it quite naturally.
You know, we in our parish we run a total family program, an educational program, and part of it, as we originally conceived it anyway, was for the parents and the children to study the same topic at different levels and then come together and discuss it afterwards. And we found, one, a lot of resistance to the idea, and two, a lot of people really unable to do that because they weren't used to discussing with their children. They seemed ill at ease with it. They didn't really know how to go about it. And certain other people in our parish responded very well, and you could see them just jump into it. And our perception as leaders of the program was that here were people who would practice this generally at home. In other words, this was part of their general family lifestyle, was to talk about important issues. And certainly it seems to me this idea of talking about television would be good. But I'm thinking that the parents would need to be able to view it somewhat critically.
Oh, yes. They'd have to have some critical awareness. I'm not arguing with that. They have to have some training in critical awareness. But another flip side of this, that's on the receiving side of television. There's also the production side of television, which ought to be emphasized. I take as my model film studies. I think that film itself as a medium was demystified when secondary schools across this country and colleges and universities began to offer courses in filmmaking. People began to understand the process here. I think it's extremely important for parents to take their children to a television studio. It's not difficult. It can be arranged. Every television station in this area has regularly scheduled tours, and they should be able to see a television studio. They should be able to see how television is made, and hopefully make television themselves.
Another practical way of trying to get at this.
Clearly, it's important to me to demystify that.
Do we have any other methods we should get out here, Mike?
Well, one of the next logical step, of course, is the production of television yourself. The availability of home equipment for television production is remarkable. I mean, you can.
This is for the more sophisticated person who's been through a lot of other stages, I would take it.
I would disagree.
Are there any
with the
more
stage.
primary things we think that are good hints to parents as to how to deal with children
on the television itself? I think one of the things you have to, a very specific hint, is to limit the number of hours they watch it, and to very clearly limit that, to agree upon 2 to 3 hours, let's say, an evening at the maximum, and to control that, and to say that there's an on switch and there's an off switch.
You know, one of the families that tried that told me it was interesting that during the first week there was chaos and there was all kind of problems, and they allowed the children to choose some of the programs themselves. And but eventually they saw that settled down, and they thought they saw a marked increase in the creativity of the children, the ability to play together, to do other things once that television was off. So really, the idea of just leaving it on all the time, from your viewpoint at least, doesn't seem very good. And I must say, from my viewpoint, theologically, religiously, and the way it shapes our perceptions of things, I believe that it would be good to monitor that or to regulate that in some way.
And the same is true of the number of television sets. That's also a key, it seems to me. We always assume that the television family is watching it together. That's not the case. There are, many homes that are multiple television set households, and those are the ones where there's a lot of private viewing going on, not communal viewing. And I think more communal viewing, in other words, my argument would be
very good,
healthier and positive direction.
I know that some families go directly against television and won't have the set in the home at all. They feel it is nothing but a corrupting influence, and I know that there's another side to that.
Well, that's irresponsible on the other end.
Well, I don't think they judge it that way, but there are some people who think that that's the most responsible thing to do because they think of it as a corrupting influence. Probably it's not allowing full development of one's rational powers and so on. But that I guess the argument on the other side is to say, hey, television is here, it's part of our life, it's shaping our mentality, it's what everyone talks about, it's our common frame of reference, therefore one ought to be aware of it, and to do it intelligently and in a critical way.
One of my model parents, I think, is a good friend of mine in Chicago who recently purchased a videotape recorder player. And what he does is he chooses programming with his children that they're going to view, tape records it, and then replays it later and rediscusses it with them. And I thought that was I thought that was a particularly enlightened approach to the problem.
I was thinking, too, about the great variety that's available on television. I think part of this would be to be in tune with that, and not think that one just has to watch the regular network shows. And you think of some of the offerings on public television, which are so tremendous, being able to watch concerts that one would have never been able to attend in years past, to hear some of the science programs that have been developed. So much goes on. The Shakespeare plays that we're on. It is just a terrific experience, and that maybe if one looked more carefully at the week's offerings or the evening's offerings, you can often come up with a quality program, it seems to me, that will appear almost every night.
But I also hold forth for programs like Little House on the Prairie. I personally am happy that my family and I are growing up on Little House on the Prairie. I think that its values are good values, and I think that they reinforce certain patterns. It's also a very well-done show.
Mike, how about some other quick things to return to the, I think, so we've got a lot of ideas out on methodology. So you said we need courses in the schools. We end up needing to sit down and watch television together and to discuss it afterwards. Parents should be ready to deal with their children that way and to talk about it. We've got workshops available. There's books you can read of criticism, and so on. So there's many different ways we do that.
Is there anything... Well, I was going to say they ought to encourage their public libraries to stock some basic books on television criticism, and they ought to maybe even encourage the library to sponsor discussion groups of those works.
Any general principles we should keep in mind? Watch critically, right? I mean, let's watch intelligently, and let's see the ways in which it's trying to shape our sense of reality. Look for ways in which it might distort what is going on. See if we end up agreeing with the values presented. Let's face it, there's a lot of people today who are trying to mount campaigns to get a lot of programs off. They're trying to get the advertisers to get rid of the programs with excessive violence and poor portrayals of human sexuality. And so we should keep that in mind, too, that there is the element here who wants to really tightly control all of this.
But I think the best guide for me, at least, is intelligent consumption. The ability to carefully consider what it is that you're doing and to use it intelligently. It's a tool. Television's a communicative tool like the telephone, like radio, and it ought to be used wisely.
Intelligently, yeah. And this fits in with my whole religious perspective on it, which is to say that if we're going to live well in this modern world of ours, we have to be ready to sort out our experience, to reflect on what is going on with us, and to get in touch with the deeper things that's shaping our sense of reality, to see in which ways we might be subject to distortion and illusion in our lives. We're called upon to live as genuine people and to be in touch with our true self. And one of those major things that's shaping our psyche and our mentality these days is television. And so we're going to have to watch it critically just for the sake of becoming better human beings and living a richer life.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Dr. Michael Marsden, associate professor of popular culture at Bowling Green State University. The topic of this week's Reflections was how to watch television intelligently. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mark Ferguson. Executive producer is Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.